Okay, Vic. Well, it's nice to finally get in contact with you after we have tried with Skype and failed 2 nights in a row. so it's good to finally speak with you. Like you do on your show, you ask people to give a short bio of themselves. Would you do that for me, please?
Be glad to. My name is Vic Cundiff. I got started in all this at an early age. I've always been fascinated with things that go bump in the night. Fast forward to 2008, I was asked to co-host a talk radio show called Campfire Shadows with a gentleman who is now deceased named Shane. And it's been so long, I hate to say it, but I forgot his last name. Shane McMahon. I was asked to co-host a Bigfoot-specific talk radio show called Campfire Shadows with Shane McMahon. I co-hosted that show with Shane in 2008 and 2009, and a funny thing happened. While I was working on that show, from time to time we would have guests come on who talked about Dogman this, Dogman that. Back then, I didn't really know all that much about Dogman. That was really the first I had heard about the phenomenon. Well, as I learned more and more about the phenomenon, I was hooked. I was addicted. It just drew me right in like a moth to a flame. It wasn't long before Bigfoot, at least to me, became kind of boring, and Dogman took Bigfoot's place. Everything that had originally drawn me to Bigfoot, the scary aspect of it, the mystery, all of that.
Right.
Those qualities to be a lot more intense. So that really is why I got into this whole Dogman encounters thing. The fascination I had for the topic, and then later on, my frustration with the fact that eyewitnesses who unfortunately have had encounters with these things, the fact that these people didn't really have a good place to go, no easy way to get their stories out. So that's why I created Dogman Encounters, as a means for people like that to be able to get their stories out, as well as for them to have someone like me who's easily reachable that they can talk to about their encounters and find out that they're not the only ones who have had them.
Right. And yes, I know that if a person has PTSD or has a traumatic experience, one of the first things any counselor would do would be to ask them to share with others who have had encounters, or to start talking about it so it desensitizes the trauma. Do you believe that that's what people get out of it sometimes when they are reaching you and sharing their stories?
Oh, without a doubt. I can't tell you how many times I've heard them talk about how nice it is to be able to openly talk about what they've been through and what they continue to go through. The worst aspect of this whole Dogman Encounters thing to me is finding out about how common it is for eyewitnesses to not even be able to turn to their families for help. They can't turn to their spouse, they can't turn to their friends, can't turn, like I said, to their family. Can you imagine having something so traumatic happen to you as a Dogman encounter and not even be able to turn to the person that you married for help on this? It's a prison without walls.
Yes, that is true, and that's one thing that this has in common with some of the things that I cover on my channel that are more on the supernatural side, having to do with demons and things like that. I have a lot of people send me stories, and they had nowhere to share it, because if they did, most of the times people wouldn't believe them, or they would be labeled as crazy and things like that. So it's almost a double trauma, not just the PTSD from the scary experience, but also a secretive thing that they have to keep inside and never get out. So what I think that you have is somewhat of a ministry, so to speak. Okay. Now, I noticed on your show you have talked about different types of Dogman. And I thought that was really interesting because every time I listen to one of your shows, I want to hear what type they saw. Can you explain the different types of Dogman that there are?
Well, that's kind of a complicated question. I'll do the best I can to answer that for you. The first thing to start with probably should be the fact that Native Americans claim that there are 7 different kinds of dogmen roaming the wild places of North America. As it turns out, dogmen are all over the world, unfortunately. But anyway, as far as North America goes, it's been alleged by them that there are 7 different kinds of dogmen roaming around out there. In my experience from talking to a lot of eyewitnesses, I firmly believe that this can all be broken down to 2 different categories. You've got what I call canine-type dogmen as one category, which seems to be the biggest category, the most commonly seen type of dogman. And then you've also got what's called Type 3 dogmen. Type 3 dogmen look a lot like a Bigfoot with a muzzle. Canine-type dogmen have more of that traditional werewolf appearance to them, like you would see in, say, an Underworld movie, for example. Now, as far as the different types, the different kinds of Type 3 dogmen would go, you've got a kind, in my opinion, that is very Sasquatch-like. It's very big, it's very bulky, but it still has that muzzle, and it's got pointed ears. It doesn't seem to have a tail. You've got that kind of dogman. You've also got another kind of Type 3, in my opinion, that is much more slight of build. They're tall, but they aren't nearly as robust as the first kind of Type 3 I just mentioned. These tend to have a baboonish looking head. They look like a buff basketball player, at least that's a very common description for what they look like. They sometimes are reported as having a tail, sometimes they're not. There is another kind of Type 3 dogman, in my opinion, that's not quite as large as the second kind of Type 3 I just mentioned. This type of, or I should say this kind of Type 3 is very man-like in size, normally around 6 feet tall from what I gather, but this particular Type 3 has a head that looks very similar to the werewolf from An American Werewolf in London. Those 3 kinds of Type 3 dogmen are the only 3 varieties that I know of as far as cryptids that seem to fall under that Type 3 category. Moving over to the canine type dogman category, you've got a kind of dogman apparently that fits under that category that has eyes on the side of it, that has eyes on the sides of its head. In other words, monocular vision, like the dogman Kirk Stokes saw in 91. You've also got a kind of canine type dogman that looks very similar to the werewolves you see in the Underworld movies. Very monstrous in appearance, very large, or they can be very large and whatnot. You've also got a third kind that I know of, or think I know of, I've heard about several times, that looks a lot like a timber wolf that stood up on its back legs. Michael F. Smith and Chris Huckins came on to episode 1 of my show, talked about having an encounter with a canine type dogman that fits into this category. I know about those 6 different kinds of dogmen I just mentioned. I'm not sure what a 7th kind would be. I only have fielded interviews covering the 6 that I just mentioned.
Right. That is very interesting. I noticed on episode 45, I believe, you had a fellow who was out camping, I think up in the New York area, somewhere around in there, and he was a Muslim. And he mentioned that when he saw the Dogman, he was angry. And so there's a couple things that stood out. He was angry for one, and then when he was on his way back to the tent, he was praying, and he thought that it was a jinn. Now, I thought that was kind of interesting because it does seem that if people encounter these creatures when they're angry or something similar to that, then it kind of points to there is a supernatural aspect. So what do you think about, if you did watch my video, then I tried to explain how something can be supernatural but yet physical. And so do you think that these creatures may be, or just possibly, may be supernatural?
They might be supernatural, but as soon as I start forming an opinion on the whole supernatural versus flesh and blood thing, something will come up to change my mind. I'm not really sure what to think about that. They've been seen doing so many things that would make you swear they fit into the supernatural category, such as seemingly being able to come out of nowhere, seemingly being able to do other things that just defy description. They also do things that make you swear that they must fit into the flesh and blood category. Things such as when they're seen drinking out of streams, eating roadkill. When you see that young dogmen are reported as being seen, things like that make you swear that they must be flesh and blood. Because of this back and forth, I'm really not sure what to think, Brenton.
Right, and that's one of the reasons that I added that section to the video that I had just made. I was trying to explain that you can be a flesh being and still be supernatural, and of course I get that from the Bible. So if someone doesn't subscribe to the Bible, then they might not care about my opinion too much. But anyway, I just wanted I think that most people that look at this have to waver back and forth at least, that there's some supernatural aspect. And I noticed that Linda Godfrey, when she was talking about the subject, she would say things like, whenever have you run across a bear and had feelings that that were malicious toward, in the kind of feelings that people get from the Dogman, it are not the type of feelings they get from seeing other type of creatures. Do you think that might be because that the Dogman is such a odd, out of the ordinary kind of creature?
You know what? That's such a hard question to answer. All I can do is just throw ideas out there and hope one of them sticks. I'm not really sure what to say on that. That is true that no other creature in existence can affect your emotions the way that these things seemingly can. So that fact right there would point towards them being supernatural. But again, when you consider when they do other things that would point towards them being flesh and blood, it's really hard for me to put a finger on exactly what they are.
Right. Well, I appreciate you, making that clear. How you see it, because yes, it is something where I think most people at least waver back and forth on, not knowing what to think because we don't have a specimen. Okay, I noticed too another thing that made me think about them being flesh, not flesh and blood, but flesh and bone, is because in episode 1 and a few other cases where the creature was shot and they knew that they had shot it, but they never found blood. And so I was explaining that in one of my videos. I don't think that a person ought to shoot them, and I know you feel the same way. So if someone was to encounter one, what do you say that they should do?
Well, if someone does encounter one, it's just an unfortunate circumstance. If you encounter almost any animal, there are a set of procedures that have been laid out by quote-unquote experts that if you follow them, you're giving yourself the best chance possible for survival and, in other words, walking out of that scenario hopefully unscathed. With dogmen, we just don't know nearly enough about them to be able to lay out a procedure for what you should do if you encounter one. All we can do is guess. As far as my opinion on what the best way would be to handle that, I always tell people, if you do have a dogman encounter, treat that dogman the same way you would treat a bear. Thing to trigger a predatory response. Don't do anything that might make it think that you're challenging its dominance. Try to avoid eye contact, in other words, for many reasons. But other than that, maybe carrying an ear horn, which in my opinion is probably your best means of defense. That whole ear horn tactic of trying to drive away and protect yourself consequently from a dogman, that idea came from a gentleman named David Kyleman, who's a researcher up in Michigan.
Right. But you would also say is only shoot one if you think that you have no other choice.
That's right. I always tell people, don't pull the trigger on a dogman unless you're convinced you're going to die anyway. If you do pull the trigger on a dogman and it wasn't planning initially on attacking you, you've basically sealed your own death certificate, because if it wasn't intending on launching an attack, if you pull that trigger on a dogman, I can't see how you haven't guaranteed an attack, unfortunately.
Yeah, I know. I was thinking that those guys on episode 1 was fortunate that that they ended up living through that, because I just don't believe that you can kill them unless you had some kind of bazooka or a grenade launcher or something that would All right. I think you answered one of my questions when you were talking about them being widespread. In ancient cultures, such as like in Egypt, when we see these drawings of the dog-headed being and their hieroglyphs and what have you, do you find that they're back through even ancient times that the dogman has been around?
It would appear that they have. Those hieroglyphs came from something. Almost all those hieroglyphs that you see, they came from something. They weren't something that was just pulled out of thin air. As far as those hieroglyphs go, the deity that they're supposed to represent is called Anubis, the guardian of the underworld, from what I understand. I'm not a theologist, so I wouldn't be the one to try and give a lecture on this, but that is supposedly Anubis that you see in those hieroglyphs. I wouldn't be surprised, since dogmen had to come from somewhere. They didn't just magically appear in 1887 when the supposed first encounter happened in Wexford County, Michigan. I think they were around back then, and that's where the hieroglyphs came from.
Right. Wow, that is interesting that it would have been something from the underworld, because that seems to be the kind of feeling people get when they meet one. Okay, now David Pilates, or Pilatus, or however you pronounce his name there, he has this 411 missing people books that he's put out, and I hear him on different radio shows and what have you. And sometimes he'll talk about Bigfoot, And sometimes he'll even entertain the idea at a MUFON conference, and entertain the idea maybe it might be UFOs or Bigfoot that is responsible for people coming up missing in state parks all around the country and the world, even after he got to his third book. After I started hearing about the Dogman, I thought that maybe Dogman might be and Bigfoot, being out in the wilderness, that they would possibly be the culprit in some of the disappearances. Have you ever thought about that?
I've spent a lot of time thinking about that. When you consider their nature, I think that it would be a lot more likely that Dogman would be at the root of a lot of these disappearances than Sasquatch would. When you consider the fact every indication points towards Sasquatch just being huge primates. If they're huge primates, then apparently they are omnivores compared to Dogmen, which seem to be, logic would point towards them being at least obligate carnivores. With Sasquatch having the ability to feed themselves by other means than eating meat, they've got their pick of berry patches and other types of ways of meeting their caloric daily needs. With Dogmen, they can't be so lackadaisical about where they get their calories. With that in mind, coupled with the fact that you're talking about a creature that could be upwards of 800 pounds in some circumstances, I think if a big meal, i.e. a person, comes along in the right, or maybe I should say the wrong circumstances, I don't think that they can be all that picky. I think they would be a lot more likely because of that to snatch someone up and unfortunately eat them.
Right. Yes, that was the number one suspect on disappearances that I was thinking about would be Dogman. And he did talk about one case where the girl was found fairly quickly, and she was standing at the edge of this cliff, and something had jumped off of that cliff, and the girl said, "A dog ate my hat." And there was a few different cases like that where the kids that were found mentioned something about a dog being what had taken them. So that to me is very interesting, and it makes me leery about going into the woods without a gun and without other people. Oh, that's for sure. Okay. You told how long you've been covering this. You've been doing this for a while. Do you have any books?
I don't have any books, and on a regular basis I get asked if I'm going to publish any books, but to be honest, doing what I do takes up so much time as far as this whole Dogman encounters thing that I can't see how I would have the time to be able to publish one. I'm perfectly content talking to these people who were unfortunate enough to have these encounters. I really don't need to put any books out there to satisfy any need, I guess you could say, for a lack of a better term. I'm just happy helping these people, doing the show, giving them a venue to get their word out. That's more than good enough for me.
Right, yeah. And, and if people want to know, they can watch your shows. You've got so many shows adding up now that I think that's almost as good as any audio book. And you're learning. I think that by listening to these encounters like that you do, and it's kind of what I do on my channel also, that over time I learn more and more and more by hearing encounters. Now, I think, too, that if you were to try to convince somebody that Dogman is real, the best way to do it is for them to listen to the stories. Do you agree with that?
Oh, I agree without a doubt. When someone is lying about an encounter, okay, they're going to use their creativity to come up with false facts or whatnot, but when you sit there and listen through 47 episodes of Dogman Encounter, and you have a chance of Dogman Encounters, and you have a chance to listen to how many eyewitnesses are reporting the exact same features and things about what they saw, that right there is a huge testament towards the fact that there's really something going on here. If that wasn't the case, if this guest reported seeing this feature or this quality and the next guest reported seeing something totally different, then that would point towards this just being a bunch of lies that are being made up. But that's not the case.
Right. Yes, and you know, that's what convinced me when I listened to your show, the amount of stories and the complexity of some of the stories and the similarities and the differences even. But eyewitness accounts can be used in courts of law. So to me, I think eyewitness accounts are more valuable than any blob squatch picture or blob, because every time you get a picture, I don't think it's any good. Do you think that these beings, the reason that they are not being captured on trail cams is that they are able to see the infrared?
That could be. From what I understand, there are animals that can detect infrared. But I think it's a little deeper than that as far as why it's so hard to capture these things on film. I have seen footage of dogmen from game cams on video. So that shows me right there it is possible to capture footage of dogmen on video using game cams if you have the right set of circumstances. But when you consider how at home they are in the woods, I mean, if you had something in your living room that someone put there, you would notice it right away. I don't care how obscure it was. You know that room like the back of your hand. You can go through the living room with the lights out because you know it so well. I think it's the exact same thing with them. They know their territory so well that if you do have a ward on a tree, in other words, a game cam there, they're going to pick up on it and avoid being captured in most cases on film by that game cam. I think that's what's going on there, and consequently that's why they're so hard to film.
Right, yes, I agree. Probably even a combination of maybe seeing the infrared plus, like you just said, they would notice something like that. Their perception is probably way beyond a human perception, even visual and things like that. Do you think that Bigfoot and Dogman would live in the same territory, or do you think when one comes along they push one of the other out?
Well, yes and no. I think that they can live in the same area together. I don't believe at all that they would intermingle. I think they can live in the same area if there's a geological feature, such as a river, for example, to keep them separated. You know what they say, fences make great neighbors, and I think as far as Dogman and Bigfoot would go, I think if there's a fence of sorts in the way of, say, like a river or whatnot, I think they can live in the same area. That's, like I said, that's not intermingling, but it is living in the same area.
Right. Okay. Well, just for a kind of a fun question, who do you think would win, a Bigfoot or a Dogman?
Well, you know, it would depend on the kind, in my opinion. It would depend on the kind of Dogman we're talking about here. How mature is it? And as far as the Bigfoot goes, I'd say the same thing, since it would appear there's more than one kind of Bigfoot roaming around out there. Right. But I think in most cases, everything being equal, I can't see how a Bigfoot would best a Dogman when you consider the weaponry that a Dogman brings to the fight. Right. You're looking at jaws, hands, and claws that would go up against Bigfoot's only weapon, which would be hands, brute force, and using their hands. So, in my opinion, if everything is equal, I think that it would have to go to the Dogman.
I agree. Sometimes I hear about the Bigfoot, and somebody will say that it was this big, and I think, wow, that would definitely be a big fight. But in Kirk Stokes' encounter, the Dogman he encountered with the eye on the side was, according to him, the eye was as big as a softball, and the creature's head was 2 foot wide, and down at the end of the nose, it was 8 inches across, and it was 12 foot tall. That is a huge creature, and I don't see how any Bigfoot would match up to something like that.
Not at all.
In the video now, since you did watch that, he had some rocks and pebbles and things like that being thrown at him before the crunching through the woods started happening. I told him it seemed like to me that he may have had a Bigfoot, because that seems to be what they do on a regular basis, throw these rocks already there, messing with them, and then this Dogman came along making that amount of noise, because I know they can be quiet in the woods. He was making that amount of noise, trying to basically come along and show his dominance in that area. What did you think about that?
Well, I think you're right. I think that was a Sasquatch that was throwing those pebbles, but since I didn't see what was there, since I wasn't there, I'm not big on jumping to conclusions, so I really can't say. I will tell you that when you look at the hand structure that Dogmen seem to have with those claws that stick out of their fingertips, I can't see how that would facilitate throwing pebbles like that. It would have to be really difficult, if you think about it, for them to do that, whereas you, me, or a Sasquatch to get in the way, it would be pretty easy to pinch a pebble between the tip of your thumb and your index finger and do that. If it was a Sasquatch doing that, why was it doing that? Well, maybe it knew, in my opinion at least, maybe it knew that Dogman was there and was on the way. Maybe it was doing that trying to drive Kirk and the guys off before that Dogman arrived. I really don't know. All I can do is guess as far as what was the reasoning behind that taking place.
Right. Yes, that's a good guess. And that's what I was doing, is guessing. But it seemed to me that the rock throwing was not the Dogman, since that thing was crashing through the woods, because they are known for being able to be stealthy, aren't they?
Oh, sure. That's why I just shake my head when I hear someone, and I hear it with a pretty good regularity, when I hear someone talk about how they're just going to head out to their local woods with a gun and try and bag a Dogman. These things are so at home in the woods that they could take you out. It will. I don't care what kind of gun you towed out there. The biggest gun in the world isn't going to do a bit of good if it can't be put on target. So that's just the biggest joke, thinking that taking a gun out into the woods makes you safe in any way.
Right. I agree. I don't think that I don't believe you can kill one unless you were to have something that only the military would have, and that would be a grenade launcher or something that would remove the head from the creature. Because I don't think they personally bleed. I think they're flesh and bone, but that's my opinion. Who knows? Maybe someone will bag one day, but I wouldn't count on it. From the cases I've heard, that it's a pretty resilient creature. So from here, what are your plans for the future to continue with radio show? Do you have any other plans? And if you would like to plug your website, your all your sites and your radio show at this time, if you would.
Sure, love to, thank you. DogmanEncountersRadio.com is the base of operations, for a lack of better terms, for the podcast. You can go on to DogmanEncountersRadio.com to listen to shows via YouTube or listen to the shows on the website itself if you just want to listen. DogmanEncounters.com is the website I created to go and learn more about Dogmen. You can also, while you're there, visit the Encounters/sightings page if you'd like to read encounters from various states across the lower 48 and also across the world. As far as what the future holds for Dogman Encounters, I'm having so much fun doing what I'm doing, talking to these eyewitnesses, helping them as much as I can get over the trauma that they've been through, talking to new people all the time about their encounters that they've had. In my opinion, if it's not broke, don't fix it, and I don't intend to fix it. So for as far as the immediate future would go, I don't have any intentions on changing anything.
Okay. I have one favor to ask you. I have a subscriber your show is her favorite show. She kind of tells me mine and yours, but I can tell your show may be the favorite show. And her name is Marcy. And I told her that I would get you to give her a shout out and say, hello, Marcy.
I'd be glad to. Well, hi, Marcy. Thanks so much for listening to this show. I really appreciate it.
All right. Well, I appreciate you doing that. I told her I would try to do that, and she was so excited about it. And she is a huge fan of yours, and that's how I had found your show, and even a few other people that has found your show due to her. So I thought that would be nice. Well, Vic, I appreciate you coming on today and answering some questions for me. After I get this done, I will certainly holler at you so that you can see what I'm doing, and I may holler at you in the future for your expertise on this subject, because I think it's a fascinating subject, and I do believe it will be a very popular subject for a while, because I believe the encounters seem to be coming. I don't know if they're more or if people are talking about it more because of shows like yours, but it's gaining popularity.
As time goes by, Britton, I've noticed that this whole Dogman thing is just ramping up like crazy. I'm not sure how popular it's going to get, but I could see in the fairly near future this whole Dogman thing being as popular as Bigfoot is right now. Time will tell. We don't know that's going to happen for sure, but like I said, I wouldn't be surprised in the least if that did come to be. One thing I want to share too, Britton, if you don't mind, not only are those websites out and about for people to peruse and whatnot, I forgot to mention that there's also a Dogman Encounters page on Facebook that you can visit for more information. And also, too, if you like the show, please don't hesitate to send me a friend request. Go on Facebook, do a search for Vic Cundiff, and I don't see how you could have difficulty figuring out which Vic Cundiff is me, so right. I'd love to have you as a friend.
Yes, and another easy way to find some of your sites will be go to your YouTube channel and click on the icons that are on the channel art. That's how I've easily found your Facebook, and you can find your radio show too there. So that's one way to find his Facebook anyway, and a few of his sites, and I will certainly leave some links in the description. Well, thank you very much, Vic, and I will be in contact with you again in the future if you would help me again on a future project.
Oh, I'd love to come back. Thanks so much for having me. You've had a great time.
Thank you very much, and goodbye.